listening to episode 64 of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Josh Havens.
And I'm Chris Lamberth. And we're on a journey to learn what it means to live a lifestyle of discipleship. We're glad you're joining us and hope that as you set aside this time for God, that He would help you grow today in the everyday moments of life.
Today we have the privilege of talking with Cindy Bunch. Cindy is Associate Publisher and Director of Editorial at InterVarsity Press, where she's worked for more than 30 years. Cindy acquires and develops for the Formatio line of spiritual formation books. And she holds an MA in Theological Studies from Northern Seminary, and she completed her spiritual direction training at North Park Seminary. Her book, Be Kind to Yourself, is a refreshing invitation to release your frustrations and embrace joy.
Jesus calls us to love our neighbors as ourselves. But what if we don't act lovingly towards ourselves? We are all guilty of negative self-talk. We say things to ourselves that we would never say to another human being. But we feel justified because no one else knows about it. But if we can't love and take care of ourselves, we won't do the same for others. If God's love is to truly be the driving force in our lives, then we must stop tearing ourselves down with negative self-talk and destructive habits. As Cindy teaches us in this episode, we need to learn to be kind to ourselves so that God's love can fill our lives and bring us joy. If we are not able to love ourselves, then we won't be able to effectively love those around us. Cindy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to be talking with you today about your book, Be Kind to Yourself, Releasing Frustrations and Embracing Joy. That's quite the title for this day and age, especially. I think who doesn't, need to be a little bit more kind to themselves. So, but why did you write the book? Where did this come from? How did the Lord birth this in your heart?
Sure. So I think books probably often start from multiple perspectives or multiple angles, so there are probably a few different things stirring in me. I share in the book a beginning point, which was I'm a book editor at InterVarsity Press, and I was reading a manuscript by Jem and Alan Fadling called What Does Your Soul Love? And I know you've talked with Jem and Alan as well. And in the manuscript, they had this phrase, notice when you are bugged. And the context was talking about how we place ourselves in a state of openness before God, and that might be a clue about the inner life, is you notice what's bugging you, and that something about that phrasing really stopped me short. And so I kind of made a mental note of that and went on about my workday, and but feeling like God was saying something to me in it versus me working as an editor. So I came back to it later, and I decided to make it into a question of what's bugging you. And then I made a corollary question, what's bringing you joy? And what I was doing in that was really creating a new way of doing the examine, which is a spiritual practice that St. Ignatius designed. And I had tried that practice over the years. The idea, the way it's taught traditionally, is you look for moments of desolation where you're far from God, which is generally thought of as sin, and moments of consolation, which are the things that draw us to God, the ways that we know God is near with us. And you do it at night. And so I would try to do that at night, and what would happen is I get on this negative mental loop about all the things I did wrong, which we need to do at times and confess, but it didn't make me sleepy. So I decided to try this kind of restatement and doing it in the morning, and I found that to be such a productive practice for me. So that was kind of the rooting practice that was happening in me. At the same time, was thinking about this idea of self-kindness or self-compassion as a Christian. And I'd actually looked for a book on it as a book editor, and I wasn't finding anything. It's not been explicitly written on a lot by Christians. And there's some Buddhist books actually that are more known and popular. So I wanted to write, what would a Christian practice of self-compassion look like? So those are some of the beginning points.
Okay, that's cool. You've given us a lot to dig into and unpack there. So that was one of the things that stuck out to me early. Well, you write about it early in the book, but this journaling practice of the examine. So listeners of the podcast know about the journal that we sell, the Daily Growth Journal. And in it, we kind of do the exact same thing. We have our own examine practice. But we've changed it up. We ask those two questions a little bit differently. You said, though, when you were describing it, you had tried it before and it didn't really stick. So are you saying, like, changing up those questions, that really helped you, and then you don't do them at night anymore? You just do them the next day? So you do them in the morning for the previous day?
That's right. Yes. So I reflect back on the previous day. And somehow it feels lighter to me in the morning, like I'm already sort of taking myself less seriously, or to just do that little review of the day. It keeps me from getting caught in sort of a lot of negative thinking about the previous day, though sometimes I can still get caught in that a bit. And then just writing down, like I write down number 1 and number 2. And sometimes I write more than one thing, but something about that really simple way of doing it also helps me. And
and remind me, your first one was what's bugging you, because I think that's brilliant. And then what's bringing you joy. I imagine, though, like those questions, because that's the way I've ended up using our journal a lot too, is because sometimes you just kind of miss the evening journaling habit or schedule. But I can imagine, though, you're right, that would bring you into a position where if you end, if that's the last question you ask rather than what's bugging you, what's bringing me joy, it sort of pulls you into the day already with that idea of gratitude. But you're an avid journaler, right? So that's not where your journaling stops. You journal about all kinds of things, right?
I have journaled over the years. For sure, but I would not say I'm an avid journaler. Using this practice has made me more regular with my journaling than I ever have been. I'm the sort of person that often would journal, like when I go on to have a retreat day or something, that I do a whole bunch of writing, or maybe when I'm really trying to work something out or make a decision. But I was never like an everyday journaler.
Okay.
So it's been really good for that practice as well.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I might just be stereotyping since you're an editor.
Book editor, yeah.
And you said at one point, right, your journals are not for anybody. You fully intend on burning them. And so I just kind of maybe have an image of having lots of journals. So, but that's good to know. That's and that's what I love about those kinds of prompts that are really simple like that, because for myself, when I would try to journal, I hate the blank page. Like I just, you kind of sit there and you're like, what am I supposed to write about? I don't want to just like write down what happened during the day. Some people like that.
Right.
I want like purpose, and then I want to get in and get out. And so that's what I love about that examine. And your questions are great. What's bugging me, and then what's bringing me joy. Who did you write this book for, though? Who do you want to pick this up and take it home?
Well, that's a very dangerous question to ask an author, because we all think we wrote it
for
everyone.
Yes.
So now that we got that out of the way, I definitely was thinking of people that, in particular, that maybe are less familiar with spiritual practices, and I was trying to create a accessible entryway, trying to keep things sort of simple and doable. So, there are lots of practices in the book. I didn't even realize how many until I was finished. My editor started counting them up. So I don't want people to take it as like I have to do all this stuff by any means. Like I just wanted to create something that would give people lots of options to like grab onto some little idea that might just really help them in an ordinary, everyday day with God.
Yeah, and I do. It is for everybody. Everybody should go and pick up a copy of this book, because it's very easy to read, and there are wonderful practices. And so whether you are a seasoned Christian and you've done all the spiritual disciplines, or you are just beginning and you've done none, this book will do something for you. So I can promise you that.
Well, and to even say all the spiritual disciplines.
Yeah, I know. I say it tongue in cheek. It's pretty funny.
Well, I think it is important to note, though, because so many people get caught up in they want a rule to follow. They want a formula that they can follow, that they can then reproduce the spiritual growth that they see in others. And so it's like, oh, I'm going to go and study everything that St. Ignatius did, and then try to do everything exactly like him, or I want to do everything like Francis of Assisi, and I want to live like that. And then they realize, oh, well, I'm living a totally different life in a totally different time in a totally different context.
Yeah.
I think all the way back to our conversation with Adele Calhoun and her book, blanking on the title now.
Spiritual Disciplines Handbook.
Yeah, Spiritual Disciplines Handbook. I wanted to.
That's my book.
I wanted to say it was something like that, but
Yay!
There it is.
This is the old edition, but it still works.
And you couple the idea of that thing with Richard Foster's Streams of Living Water, and really when it comes to spiritual practices for spiritual formation, discipleship in the Christian life, we have to remember that there's not just a single path, which sounds kind of weird. But we still believe Jesus is the only way.
Yeah, Jesus is the only way.
But each of us are created in a unique way, and for some of us, some spiritual practices will work better than others.
Well, and we need them for different seasons of our lives too. And so, and again, that's why I love having these conversations. And this, I guess I'll preface. I was going to follow my question up, but I guess I'll preface it with this. Like, I love knowing why somebody gravitates to a practice that they gravitate to when they do, because it says something interesting about the kind of, or the time period and the need that you have in your own life and why a practice sticks out to you. Again, that was one of the big lessons that we learned from Adele, is that, you simply can look over these dozens of spiritual disciplines and say, like, which ones really appeal to you, and that desire is the Lord, probably stirring something in your heart here. How did you come across all of these practices that are in your book? And again, the reason why I ask that is because I want to know, like, what you are doing to even come across that many of them to then write them down and, include them. Yes.
Well, I am very privileged in my work life, the people that I get to work with, including Adele Calhoun. So a lot of it has come through my work, the books I've edited, conferences that I've gone to. I mean, it is a good 25 years of accumulating knowledge about spiritual formation, and then kind of making it my own. So I think the other thing to say about who will particularly like this book is I do a lot with creative and visual ways to do practices, because I like that, because I spend a lot of time with sitting reading with screens, and so I like to do things that kind of get me out of my head and more embodied, or even using some artistic elements, and I've found those to be powerful ways to connect with God differently. So I've particularly searched out those kinds of ways. One of the little ideas in the book is from Sybil Macbeth, who wrote a praying in color, and I call it doodling prayer, where you draw little doodles and then make put names of who you're praying for. You can make leaves on a plant or whatever, and write names. But it's a way to kind of keep your mind active if you tend to have a wandering mind while you pray.
Can I ask, how would you define a spiritual practice? What is it, and what's the goal?
Good question. A spiritual practice, I think, is to draw us close to God. That would be, for me, one of the key things, and that goes back to that thing about desire, that I think God gives us the desire to do the things that draw us close to Him. But I think there's also a piece of growth, of sort of expanding our knowledge of God, but through the experience of God in a practice.
So your book, just right off the bat, the title, Be Kind to Yourself. You talk about in the book, right, like each chapter is almost an antidote to ways that we are being unkind to ourselves, or being negative to ourselves. When did you first really recognize that pattern in yourself as something that you needed to stop or end, this like negative self-talk that we are all universally engaged in?
Yeah. one of the key ways for me has been the Enneagram, and study of the Enneagram and the idea of the inner critic, which particularly if people are into the Enneagram, plagues the Enneagram 1. But it really, I think most of us have some sense of an inner critic. And so just that concept has been helpful to me. It's also a concept that most writers are bothered by an inner critic, and that could be the whole problem of trying to sit down and write. And I narrate in the book a story about being at a writers' conference one time, and the speaker said, some writers try to get the inner critic quiet by getting him drunk, and that is not a good idea. It's not a recipe for long-term success as a writer. Yeah. So it's that probably awareness of the inner critic, and then the opposite kind of, what would it look like? What does it take to shut that thing down?
Why do we have such a hard time being kind to ourselves then? Why is that a struggle?
The interesting thing is that being Christians, it would seem, should make us all the better at that, because we are saved by grace. And we know that, and yet we do tend to still get ourselves on these paths in the Christian context where we get into these doing type. So I get Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, and I got to go through all the disciplines, all 50 in order, and that's going to make me a better Christian. And at some level, even though we know it's not true, at some level we feel like that's why, and then God will love us. Mm-hmm. It's that, and I found that in myself too. Another key practice that I haven't talked about yet is seeing a spiritual director. And through seeing the spiritual director, I was starting to unfold some of my deep inner beliefs about God and what God thought about me versus what I, theologically sort of what I knew was correct about God, which is that God is a God of grace, and I confess and God forgives. But instead I, have this other level of, but God expects this and this and this of me, or maybe God doesn't really even like me. So spiritual direction was another important piece for me. It's starting to uncover some of those God narratives.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just shout out, just because you named the title of their book, basically, Jeff and Sid Holzklaw's book, Does God Really Like Me? And so we got to talk with them, and you're right. It's I'm continually fascinated by these seemingly paradoxical positions we Christians are put in. Actually, I'm about to ramble here, Josh. I apologize, but maybe it's because there's so much seemingly paradoxical theology that we as Christians are that is orthodox, that Jesus' death on the cross brings life, and so somehow through defeat we get victory and all this sort of thing. But it seems to me I'm fascinated by the fact that what we as Christians should be the best at, we seem to be the worst at often. And again, it's this ability to love ourselves, to give ourselves grace. And I think that then translates into our inability to give others grace. I mean, we all recognize that you walk in the church and the church is not as perfect as it should be. Number one, I'm referring to the church as a place. We all know it's a people. It's the body of Christ. But we walk into those gatherings and we long for something more. We long for deeper relationships. And perhaps the answer, and what I think you're getting at here in the book, is that we're not going to be able to do that with other people until we're able to really start loving and accepting ourselves the way that Christ says that He, in fact, loves us. This gets back to this core idea of identity that we love so much, and it seems that we never get to escape, because learning who we are in the image and as children of God is such a core part of our discipleship journey that if we don't get that right, we're not going to be able to do anything else as we follow Him.
Well, and there's something that I think, at least from my own experience, hopefully is an encouragement to somebody who may be in that boat. Paul talks about the flesh working against the spirit and the spirit working against the flesh. And I think the presence of a struggle to actually be kind to ourselves indicates that there is a struggle going on spiritually between who we think we are and who we really are as God's children. And I don't know that struggle is actually present in people who aren't trying to follow. I mean, sure, it's not that Christians are the only ones who can look down on themselves, but they don't measure themselves against the same kind of Christian standard that I think we're trying. Like, we see, oh yeah, I want to be like Jesus, I've got to be perfect, and so I've got to do this, and this.
Yeah, we're literally trying to be perfect as God is perfect.
Because that's what the Bible says.
That's right.
I mean, Jesus actually said that.
Yep.
He was quoting the Old Testament, so it's in both places, and we're done. But I think the presence of the struggle indicates that we're trying, that God is doing something in us that is pulling us toward Him, and it's because it's like Paul talks about as well. When the law came, then my flesh really jumped in.
Yeah.
And so as we see grace start to come into our lives, I think the sinful nature inside of us that's still working on being taken care of and dealt with begins to rear up and push back a little bit harder. And
so maybe we should be a little kind to ourselves when we find ourselves in that struggle.
Understanding that the struggle is itself part of the growth process.
That's right. I love that. I think that's cool. And that brings me, I love to define our terms. You've got joy as the final word in your subtitle. What is joy? What are we trying to embrace here as we're learning to be kind to ourselves?
Yeah, that's good. Which relates a bit to just what you were talking about is so that this is not a little book about having a spa day and sort of treating yourself to something nice, right? Like the kind of joy I'm talking about is the really deep things that come from God, and often things that don't cost money. It's notice, it's gratitude, it's developing gratitude, it's noticing the nature around you and the lovely gifts of God's creation. It's noticing the kind thing somebody in your family did or your coworker. It's noticing all the little goodnesses of an ordinary day, and those are really the things that bring us joy. And so the more we write those down and think about those, the more we can choose those things. So it's also about choosing the things that really bring out that sense of joy, that sense of connectedness to God and others and creation, versus numbing out on Netflix or that kind of thing, which we all might do from time to time. But
so you said write them down. I think at least half a dozen times so far. Yeah. What do you think the power is in writing stuff down?
Well, one of the things I ask people to do in the course of the book is to go back and look at them. So writing them down allows you to then see what are the patterns. What are the patterns of what's bugging me? And often, again, going back to the conversation, sort of more theological conversation we were just having, is a lot of times what bugs us has to do with control. Things we can't control bug us, like people and various events in our lives and so on. And that's just that old, like, I want to be in charge kind of a thing. So it calls us back to surrender, and giving it to God and letting, being with what's going to happen as in God's grace. So anyway, we see those patterns, whatever they might be in our lives, and then we see the joys. We see every day, what really is it that I wanted to make a note of that made me happy, and sometimes that can be surprising or different than you might expect as well.
Yeah, I love that. What's bugging you could be the things that you can. So I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm going to have to start taking bugging. That's going to have to be my new question, because you're right. That it is absolutely the thing that whenever anything gets in my way, it's clearly in the wrong. And so it's up to me and my righteous indignation to correct whatever the problem, may be anyway. So, but you're right. I got to relinquish that. And that's a good trigger for that. Since you brought it up, I was going to ask about this because you have a great chapter on social media and how to use social media, or at least your struggle with it. How have you dealt with people or situations that frustrate you? And, I think social media is, I don't even know why we use the thing anymore other than, we need to promote stuff. But it's just an angry machine, it feels like most days. And so we just get on there and yell at people. How do you think about that now?
So my encouragement in the book is for people to, first of all, just to think about it, right? To be discerning about how it's affecting you. And, of course, right, we go on it and we compare. I mean, that's what can be one type of problem. We compare ourselves to others, or we just get hooked into people's political views and how they annoy us and those kinds of things. And so finding some boundaries that fit yourself and your life, right? Whether it's just letting it go for a season. Lots of people are doing fasts from social media for periods of time and, see how that feels. Letting go one thing, maybe Twitter's good for you and Facebook's not, or vice versa, so picking the place that fits. One story I love that I tell in the book, I had an old friend that I reconnected with, and it was really lovely. And then I started noticing some of this person's comments about an issue that I felt really, really important, and it felt rooted in my Christian faith, and they disagreed with me, and they were just I was about it was annoying enough to me that I was gonna cut this person off. I'm just go back out of my life. But it had been so fun to reconnect, so I hadn't done that. And then one day she showed up and just said, I've been saying a lot of things and I realize not everyone agrees with me and I've hurt some people and I just want to apologize. And this person was a believer too. And it was so lovely to see that, and such a surprise, right? So I stuck with it. I stuck with this person. And then, I see we all have our moments. We all have our awakenings, and So I think it's something people have to, bottom line, everybody has to decide for themselves how to engage and when to engage. But the key is, I think, just to be very conscious of it and not just mindlessly, constantly looking at it. So,
yeah, that's good. That's good advice. I try to engage as little as possible in social media, as you can tell, from my comments earlier. I'm not a big social media user, but I scroll every once in a while, and what I find is even bad for me is I am horrible at misinterpreting what people write. I read it often with an entirely different tone and intent than what they have written. Even people we've had on this podcast whom I love and we've had great conversations with, and then I'll see things in their feed and I'm just I don't know why you just said it like that. And sometimes they'll, go Facebook Live or something like that. And then they say it and I'm like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. But it's oftentimes the exact same message. It's just, when we can hear and we can see the person delivering it, it completely changes the context. And, 90% of communication is body language and tone. So, so I think I've had to just give people the benefit of the doubt and not engage as much as I might want to, because I think I'm really bad at communicating my tone, even more so. I'll come across way harsher in real life than I need to, much more, if I'm just typing some text or something like that. So
I will say props to you though, because I think in the last couple of months, you've come to me and asked, what do you think about the way that they've said this? Just as a way to kind of check your own thinking about what's going on. And so I think that's another healthy way of understanding what your tendency is and then dealing with it. So
yeah, that's cool. I've had to break my fingers off a little bit to keep from typing, but yeah, that's good. Hey, Jesus said, right, if it causes you to sin, break your finger. I'm paraphrasing.
Probably throw away your phone first.
Probably should. What have you done to make time in your life for these practices? Especially during COVID-19 and everything, life has been thrown into chaos. How have you made these different spiritual formation practices a priority for you?
Yeah, well, I do want to say that, I am at that point in my life where my kids are mostly grown. We have a college student who is back in the house during COVID, so that makes it easier than in some other stages of life. But that is another reason I've tried to make them, a lot of them, small things. One of the things I learned from my spiritual director that I love is to pray, have things that you do each day that trigger you to pray. So it was cleaning the kitchen, doing the dishes, wiping down all the counters that nobody else ever wipes. Not being bitter about that, but trying to flip that and use that as a time to then pray for my family. So trying to just say, okay, I'm not going to get a full retreat day this week or this month, but I can take a little piece of time and do something that's meaningful to me. So for me, mornings are important, and I have been able to carve out, at least a little bit of a time in the morning and have a little routine. I think for some folks, COVID's been a little easier in that we don't have the commute. So for those that don't, there can be a little more time there. Yeah, so I try to give enough ideas that people can find the way in their lifestyle that works. For me, I do always love if I can get, even like a half day on a Saturday to really have some silence and be with God and journal,
Yeah.
read, those kinds of things.
Yeah. I enjoyed it when we were working remotely. We're back in the office now most of the time, but it was just, you almost get like 2 full hours back. And not, my commute's not an hour, but it just feels like in the day, right? It's just sort of like that getting ready period and going. And before, I would just like wake up and roll out of bed and head right to my computer, make some coffee, and I was good to go. And so it's just a great time saver. But I also love how you talk about in the book, you needing to put real boundaries on your work leisure schedule, because I've got a colleague here and he confesses, he actually was working way more during this time, and especially when he works from home, he works like it's not an 8-hour day, it's more like a 10-12 hour day easily, just because you can get into your emails and you're just like busting stuff out. And so I really loved like you put certain rules in place to I think like 5 p.m. you're just like, turn off the email, you're done, not looking at it anymore. Because even if you don't respond to it, some of that stuff will just sit there and stir in your brain all night.
Yes.
And go ahead.
You're right. That was one of the things I was sharing about is sort of not intending to look and then looking at email, and then I had a thing in my head and kind of ruined an evening, and I couldn't even do anything about it. And then I was kind of like you were saying about misinterpreting social media. I was really misinterpreting the email in the first place. So it wasn't really even the problem that I thought it was, So yes. So kind of the way I think about it is a little bit inspired by monastic practice, where they have like the great silence overnight. And so I do try to shut down the email and not look at it again until I'm kind of all ready in the morning. I've had some time with God and so forth. So many people, I think, you wake up and you start looking at your phone right away. So for me, it's important to not do that until I sort of get myself set up with God for the day. Then go look.
Yeah, and maybe you need to start. Maybe you need to buy an old school alarm clock or something like that, and keep the phone in the other room. I've heard of people doing that, and so whatever it takes. And so I do that now. I used to not. Honestly, I used to not. I think I started doing it because Justin Early talked about it in his book, and I promise me just thinking about it ended up leading me to do it. And so, but I have to struggle now to be intentional about not looking at social media first thing in the morning, because it's not good for you. Unless you're like bookmarked to, IVP or Daily Growth Discipleship, and you're looking for the latest stuff.
You go.
So there you go, right?
Got to get the newest book that's coming out this week.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious, like what is some of your favorite practices that you are engaged in, like right now? Like, and maybe like if you think about the book, do certain practices come to mind that you're like, oh yeah, that right there is part of my daily routine already?
Sure. Well, I will confess that having a full-time job and launching a book is time-consuming. We also got a puppy,
Oh.
so I can have a little more identification with parents now. The writing, I really have stayed with my writing down the bugging and the joy, and that's really great for me to just stay with that every day. Doing a little bit of reading actually every morning of different books. And then I love collage so much. It's one of my favorite practices. And I've been leading a virtual retreat group, and we just got to that. And people are sharing their collages that they've made. And I just get such a kick out of that. I mean, I am just talking about take a piece of cardstock and look through magazines, and you cut out 5 or so pictures that you're drawn to. Spend a little, but this is all done kind of quietly and prayerfully, and spend some time with God, arranging those pictures, and then looking at them, talking to God about them. And it is just amazing what comes out of that. And for me, that's just one of the most sort of fun and life-giving practices. The other thing I've gone back to actually during COVID is coloring. I like both the doodling prayer and just coloring reflective pages that are inspirational. Or I think it's something about, especially early on when it all sort of felt kind of difficult and overwhelming, coloring was kind of something tactile that I could do, that I could handle when my brain wasn't taking in a whole lot of information.
Yeah. Yeah, I love people that do like the Bible journaling and the real artistic, because that's not me. Like, I'm drawn to it, but that's just not me. I can't do that. But one of the things, I haven't done this in a long time, and actually you're kind of inspiring me to do it, is Legos. I love doing that sort of like building with Legos. And so I think I bought a set when I was in seminary. And so sometimes you needed just to kind of give your brain a break, and it would help sort of, it was just something that you could do. And so I would build with Legos on my desk, and then, and then I have to sweep them off and then get back to typing. And so I might have to pick that practice back up.
You could take apart your Naboo Starfighter.
I do have one.
Put that back together.
In my office, I have
got a Lego set up here in his office.
So that would be a lot of fun. A lot of people don't think that these sorts of artistic or seemingly mundane practices wouldn't have anything to do with spiritual disciplines. But to kind of go back to your definition, it's making space in our lives that really and we can do an activity that draws us into God's presence so that we can just simply be with him. And so I don't want anybody to underestimate just taking that time to do something like that, because really it's not in the doing, it's just in the being with him, and we're just using that doing, that activity, playing with Legos, coloring, collaging, drawing, doodling, to create the space and opportunity for us to be in the presence of God and hear from him.
Like, I got an example. So let's say you're spending time with a friend and you're both doing something very mundane, like you're on a road trip or something. And I mean, you and I do this kind of thing quite often when we're on road trips. But let's say you're listening to a song or something like that, and all of a sudden you just have to pause the song and you have to talk about it. And in the conversation that follows, it all of a sudden goes from like a 5-minute conversation into a 20, 30-minute conversation. And before you know it, you're talking about, man, I didn't know I was feeling this way about this situation. And there's a real bonding moment with the two of you in that moment, just because you were listening to a song on a road trip. Well, I mean, the same thing happens as we spend time with God. It can be the most mundane thing, but it's just the fact that we're doing it together. And in that moment, I think the Holy Spirit does some amazing things as we just spend the time with him.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's exactly it. Yeah. And I should have named walking is a great one too, and which I see so many people doing now, because we can't go as many places. So taking a walk with God, and seeing what you notice.
Yeah, the other thing is, and it turned out to not be this way, especially for my ministry my friends who are in full-time ministry, which I was saddened. But I was really hoping that at the beginning of this thing, and I'm talking like like early March and when things were starting to first shut down. I was really hoping that this would be a Sabbath for the world, and like we could really just be able to Sabbath. And for most of us, it seems that it's made things in life even more hectic and chaotic as we have to, especially now that kids are back in school, we've got to try to figure out what's that like. We've got hybrid schedules all over the place. People are all over. But I do think that this is like, it's more important now than ever probably in our lifetimes that we need to make a priority for that. And so I think, and like walking for me has been that. And so anyway, that's how I'm connecting to that. It's like, if I can just get out of the house and walk around in my neighborhood, and you're right, there are dozens of people now doing that. It's just such a nice time to kind of relax and like just not be, connected to the chaos, but just be in his presence and to relax and Sabbath. What is the change that you want to see from people who read your book?
I love seeing people, sort of unhooking that thing of what bugs them, like what's stuck on their brains and why. And then noticing, how many ordinary things bring them joy. I also love seeing people just trying out practices they wouldn't have tried before, and being surprised by that. And people, because I've gotten to do this I've gotten to do the book a little bit with some virtual retreat groups that I've done, and just people noticing how they're not kind to themselves, and the mental loop. We kind of got into this earlier, that you figure out you're doing something wrong, or you're back in a pattern. Oh, I've noticed this pattern where I'm hard on myself. So then you get mad at yourself because you're back in the pattern, and then you're just further deeper in the loop, right? So now I'm judging myself because I'm bad at being kind to myself, or whatever. But anyway, just finding people unpacking those loops and noticing, how they're embedded, and how they can stop and be more gentle with themselves. I do think this is an important time for us, particularly to be aware. I think one of the first things COVID did is this whole idea that we're going to get all this stuff done. Now we're home, and we should be able to, overhaul, remodel, clean out. And, some people got some of it done, but other people were just stressed, and trying to figure out how to do virtual education and all these kinds of things. And so it's now more than ever, we just need to say, it's a pandemic, you get a break, you get a pass.
Yeah.
Just,
I think your book title says it best. We just need to learn to be kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not a great situation, but we will make it through.
Yeah.
And there is hope, even in this situation. And so we're definitely not going to make it if we just beat ourselves down. And because like you took that right out of my head, right? Is the cycle. Like that's me 100%. And so if I can't live up to it, I'm clearly the biggest failure that's ever lived. Anyway, Cindy, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I do want to say, just as we've been talking too, that your book has been so helpful to me, and I really want to recommend that people even pick up a copy and use it as a morning devotional. Like I think your book makes a perfect morning, like you're talking about that morning reading. Instead of grabbing your phone and looking at social media, man, like open this up, take a few minutes, read one of these chapters. Again, they don't take long. You'll get something really encouraging. And then I believe like the Spirit is going to do something in your heart, because you're going to find a new way to appreciate the world around you, appreciate and see God for what He's doing, and be a little bit more kind to yourself. So anyway, I just want to say that. So thank you for the book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's very
Where can people go to get it?
They can go to ivypress.com or amazon.com or Christian Book Distributors, wherever they would like to go. And if you want to go to cindybunch.com, my website, you will find a free retreat guide for like sort of a longer format reflection with some scripture study, as well as a group discussion guide. So
great. And we will link to all that stuff in the show notes, as always, guys, so you can go down there, click on that, and then get connected with what Cindy's doing, because, it's awesome.
Oh, great.
So, again, Cindy, thank you so much. I want to give you a moment if you want to give a last word or final call. You don't have to. I just sometimes think it's good to give a guest that opportunity.
Well, thank you. It's been delightful to talk with you both. And my word to folks is to be kind to ourselves, be as compassionate to yourself as Christ calls us to be to our neighbors, and knowing that one thing is very much intertwined with another. And as we grow in our own self-compassion, we'll grow in kindness towards others.
How can you create a lifestyle of discipleship? Most Christians think discipleship is a program or a few practices thrown in at the beginning or end of the day. But we want to help you create a lifestyle where walking with Jesus throughout the day is not only possible, but natural. And we have a tool that's going to help you do just that. It's called the Daily Growth Journal. It's a guided journal that's going to help you become secure in your identity with God and authentically walk with Him in your daily life. Growing daily in your walk with Christ is possible if you cultivate a lifestyle of discipleship, and the Daily Growth Journal will help you do just that. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. To find out more about Cindy's work, check out cindybunch.com. If you like what you've heard this week, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast player you use. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to stay up to date on everything happening at Daily Growth Discipleship, go to dailygrowthdiscipleship.com and subscribe for free. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.